Thanks for joining us today. Mission in a post-Christian world. David Rietveld is our guest, particularly evangelism in the post-Christian world and also bringing up kids and youth in a post-Christian world. 6 weeks ago, David Rietveld joined us and we talked about the social changes that have been going on around us as Western societies move from a Christian worldview to a post-Christian worldview. David, in his new book, Being Christian After Christendom, has presented a compelling explanation on the changes we as pastors and congregations have been going through and are going through. He's the senior pastor of Dapto Anglican Church to the south of Sydney, and we have linked to his new book in the show notes. But David, I want to get into the subject of what do we do and how do we do it. Yeah. But just as a recap, for those who didn't catch our discussion last time, where are we now and how did we get here?
Yeah, so after about 1600 years of what people would call Christendom, a place where Christian assumptions were held by everyone, whether they believed in Jesus or not. Everyone believed in God, everyone believed in a moral objectivity, everyone believed there was a day of judgment, everyone believed Jesus was a good guy and we ought to be like him. Everyone believed that somehow our eternity would be determined by how we responded to Jesus and to God in this life. That's evaporated. And it feels to us like it's kind of happened almost overnight. So in the space of 30, 40 or so years, there's no longer a shared assumption about the God being the God of the Bible, the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. People are spiritual, but they don't necessarily believe in the Christian God. People don't have God at the centre of the universe, they have themselves. We're here to thrive. And the core assumptions have shifted, and that's where we are now.
So I'm going to jump in on your last chapter where you talk about what to do, and you start off with really challenging the whole idea about, if you like, our defensive posture to the world and defending the faith. Now, I can feel some viewers and listeners saying, what? You're saying we don't need to defend the gospel? But well, what are you saying here?
Defending is, if we think of it as a kind of a metaphor, it's obviously a biblical word, right? But if we think about it metaphorically...
And the Apostle Paul says to do it in Jude and other places.
Yeah. It implies actually we hold ground and we're defending the ground that we hold. Whereas what I'm contending is that actually the Christian worldview has gone, and it's not our job to actually Christianise society. That was a good thing to do, I think, during Christendom, but to somehow think that it's our task to, stop people lying or to reinforce Christian values like anti-abortion, important stuff for us, and we can have a voice in public debates, but we now actually have to kind of go, all right, if society wants to go that way, let it go. And we're going to position ourselves slightly different. So rather than thinking defensively, defending every bridge, rather, what are the bridges that we can most likely take? Where are the places where we're most likely to be effective evangelistically? I think that's a more appropriate way to think.
So you're not saying we don't guard the gospel within the church, within the denomination, within my own church. I've got to keep teaching the truth and refuting error. You're not counselling me not to do that.
Not at all. In fact, one of the metaphors I use is a subculture metaphor. So in Christendom, Christian views were the dominant view. They were the default view, whereas now it's more like we're a subculture, and as a subculture, we want to have unique, firm, strong views that we articulate clearly, we reinforce amongst ourselves. We're just not trying to persuade everybody else that they have to have our values. We want them to believe in Jesus.
And in the end, if they believe that Jesus is Lord, they will come to hold in the sanctity of life and things like that.
Absolutely.
But we start with Jesus is Lord rather than fight the sanctity of life with people who don't believe Jesus is Lord. I think that's what you're saying.
Yeah, that's right. We're not trying to Christianise society. We want to walk alongside people and where we can share about Jesus.
Okay, so you talk about a guerrilla offensive. What do you mean by that then?
So if you're not defending every bridge, then...
Are there some bridges we should defend?
I'll come back to that question and I'll answer your guerrilla offensive, and then we'll talk about which bridges. If we're not defending every single bridge, then perhaps we can ask a question, where are our resources most likely to succeed, right? And that would look like, if we're going to witness and share, which people are most likely to respond to the gospel, or which people are currently responding? And the answer is, for instance, migrants.
Yep.
Migrants are more likely to convert, and so the number of, say, Chinese converts and Indian converts in Australia is higher than Anglo-Saxons converting.
Well, you talk about migrants, but you go on in the chapter, really, people going through disruption. I think when you say migrants, is it the case that when you say migrants, it's actually because they're going through disruption, or because they're migrants?
I think it's a combination of the both.
Okay.
So the process of migrating is an openness to adopt the culture that you're moving to. So I used to have a congregation, a church, 200-300 metres from the university. Chinese students would walk past, they would knock on the door and they would say, "I've moved to Australia. Australia is a Christian country. Can somebody please explain to me the Christian beliefs?" I would introduce them to my Chinese minister. Half an hour they would walk out the front door and the Chinese minister would say, "I've just converted that person." Nothing like that happened with Anglo-Saxons.
Yeah.
But there was a willingness of a migrant to say, "I'm here to explore Australian beliefs and ideas, Western traditional values," and therefore they're more open.
Right, okay.
Whereas disruption is a moment where we question our existing beliefs.
Yeah.
And that's significant in conversion too.
Okay, so you say migrants, but I mean, where you live in Dapto, it's not really migrant central.
Wollongong is highly multicultural, but the particular postcode that I'm in is full of 5 and 10 pound poms who haven't moved since the 1960s.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So I think migrants would be one group that we could think,
our church here, we're in a reasonably WASP area of the inner west, although our church is actually miles more multicultural than the suburb.
Yeah. So I think the guerrilla offensive might kind of lead us to think, all right, migrants, but there would be other possibilities, right? So another moment is kind of life stage transitions.
Yeah.
I think people are...
So this is the disrupt area.
It's disrupt again. So somebody's having children and they're suddenly thinking to themselves, what are our core family values? What do we believe? What do we want to teach our children? And that might be an opportunity where people are more open to a faith conversation. When I was in Tassie, whenever I had non-Christians who would come and ask to be married, 6 or 12 months later, I'd see them in the shopping centre and usually the lady was pregnant.
Yeah.
So there was something about clarifying your beliefs and your relationship with God before you began your family. That was a kind of a transition moment. That could be a strategic time to evangelise.
Yeah. We have found divorce absolutely... I mean, if you looked at the tracks into this church, one of the tracks is our Introducing God course, and the other main track is our divorce care course.
Yeah, that's right. So there's a bunch of PhDs into the sociology of conversion. When is it that people convert? And one of the realities is that people hold belief systems, and those belief systems, when they're intact, when life is kind of going okay, actually there's no need to change those. People don't feel compelled to uproot their life and change their beliefs and their values and their practices. But when people come into disruption, that is, I thought if I was a nice person, I thought if I was caring and loving, we'd have a happy marriage and a happy family, but actually it turns out that being respectful and tolerant or whatever I've tried to do hasn't worked. There seems to be some other people who've got another take on life, and maybe their approach to relationships and marriages seems to work better. I wonder what they're thinking and doing and believing that means their relationships seem to last more than what ours do. That disruption opens you to the possibility of considering other ways of thinking about things.
So, I mean, you've got these words: context, disruption, advocate, connect, and commit. I'm just going to go through them one at a time to follow your logic here. So, your context argument is, well, just give me that. Yeah.
So I think we have to appreciate that Australians are now believers in something else. We used to talk in Christendom about people who were non-believers, or they had no faith, or they were atheists, which meant not only did they not believe in God, but the God they didn't believe in was the God of the Bible. Whereas I'm suggesting that actually contemporary Australians now have a belief system and a value system and a spirituality, and it's all about them thriving and flourishing. And they don't feel a need to abandon that, just like you and I don't feel a need to abandon our faith. Right? So imagine if you and I had a new neighbour and they were an Indian migrant and they knocked on your door and said, "Dominic, I've moved from India, I'm a Hindu, I want to try and convert you to Hinduism. Can you give me your 3 reasons why you've rejected Hinduism as a worldview?" You're not likely to suddenly change your belief system just because you've got a neighbour who's a Hindu and they're a nice person, they invited you over for dinner. Right? Your belief system works, and we've got to, just like cross-cultural missionaries, we've got to try and understand the belief system of our culture, and the context, the aspirations, the yearnings, so that we can speak to those. So that's context. Disruption, we've began speaking about.
Yeah, and so, I mean, the disruption of having a child, going to playgroup, playgroup actually, as I was reading this, I thought, playgroup actually works in a disruption kind of framework, because people have gone through the new change of, I've got a new baby, I'm adjusting to this,
Absolutely, and who are going to be the friends of my children?
Yeah.
So I need somebody to invite to the 2nd, to the 3rd, to the 4th birthday party, somebody who we're going to stand on the sidelines and shout at the footy or the soccer or whatever it is. People are looking for kind of journey persons of values that they aspire to and share. And that's a moment where Christians can kind of say, actually, we're people with some pretty solid values. Do you want to do family with us? In my church, a great disruption pathway in is females retiring.
Really?
And so they join our craft group, and they're often anxious, not only because they've come into retirement, but because maybe their children's children, their grandchildren are not doing well. There might be expectations about babysitting. And so they're kind of managing all of these balls that they're juggling in life. And our craft group is just these wonderful, stable ladies who walk alongside them, who begin to pray for them, talk about Jesus, invite them to kind of a midweek cafe church for women only. And it's just a wonderful pathway.
As I read your disruption section, you noted sometimes the disruption is neutral and sometimes it's negative. And I just got thinking about the line in Amos 4 where God says, I sent you mildew, I sent you famine, I withheld rain from you, and yet you've not returned to me. That really there, God sends the disruption to cause people to return to him. And I just wondered about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I was talking about this at a church somewhere recently, and somebody put out their hand and said, so am I supposed to be praying that my non-Christian friends come into disruption?
I sent you breast cancer, or,
And my response to that was actually, I think life is full of disruptions. And I think God does allow them to happen at strategic moments to prompt us to respond. And I think the Spirit is at work in those moments, and we're either softening or hardening our hearts.
And many of us would actually say, as I look back, God gave me this situation to cause me to turn back to him, as we look at it in hindsight.
Yeah, I think that's right. So disruption moments, in hindsight, suffering actually produces perseverance, character, hope.
Now, you then talk about, not you, the literature on conversion, which actually, interestingly, I was surprised to see Rodney Stark is a big player in it. I mean, we know him from his first century church history writing, but his PhD was in this area.
Yeah, that's right. I'm a great fan of Rodney Stark, having a degree in sociology, and then I kind of bumped across his PhD one day and kind of went, wow, this is fascinating stuff.
Because he was writing on Mormons, was he?
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
So the Mormons convert at a faster than average rate, so their religion has grown. And he wanted to try and understand, how did Christianity grow so fast? So the numbers, according to Stark, are it went from, what's Jesus got, 120 followers that kind of gather in Acts chapter 1. And Rodney Stark thinks that by 356 or 350s, it makes up 56% of the empire.
They were running the Roman Empire.
That's a massive conversion rate. And he says, statistically, it's similar to what was happening in the Mormon church in America.
Wow.
Yeah. And so he's asking, what's the sociological... we like to talk about conversion as the work of the Spirit, convicting sin, or, the truth of the gospel. All of that is true, but these guys are saying, what's the social phenomena around conversion?
Okay, social phenomena, context, disruption, advocate. What's the advocate?
Yeah, you can't just have a disruption, you need more than that. You need somebody who's going to walk alongside you and kind of go, that worldview that you've got, those assumptions that you've got, if you just behave like this in your marriage, if you just parent like this, if you just behave like this at work, if you're a nice person, somehow life is going to work for you, and you'll... actually, that's not working. Why is it not working? Have you thought about this? Did you notice that when you try this, actually it doesn't work? Did you notice some other people try that and it seems to work? In relationships, if your view is actually, I'm going to fill my tank first and then fill other people's, turns out we never think our tank's full enough. And it tends to lead to shallow transactional relationships. Whereas the people who actually give of themselves first actually have the deeper relationships, right? And so it turns out that Jesus thought of this first. And so maybe Jesus has got some wisdom about relationships, right? So an advocate is both poking holes in the worldview of the person who's in disruption, or maybe they're kind of leaving a pebble in the shoe and kind of saying, just walk on that for a week, just be annoyed by that and come back to me and we'll resume our dialogue. And they're also saying, contrast your take on this with what Jesus says about this. And just, can you see that somehow maybe there's a greater truth or a hope or a reality about what Jesus says than what our world happens to think?
That could be the table facilitator on Introducing God, Christianity Explored, or Alpha, but you're also talking about it being a friend.
Yeah, I think you want to feel, if you're processing disruption, that somebody genuinely cares and is invested and is interested. And I think that also is a great opportunity for Christians, because we live in a world where you put your best face out on Facebook, where you don't really want negative people in your life because they might drag you down. And I think average Australians are maybe a little bit shallow and not practiced in walking alongside somebody faithfully, genuinely through suffering. And I think there's an opportunity there for Christians to not lean away, but to lean in and be genuine. And that can lead to further conversations.
I'm looking now at Connect, and this is very important because you've said the would-be convert must move beyond one-to-one engagement or relationship with an advocate and somehow become encapsulated within a new network, new relationships of people who hold to a new worldview, new rituals, new rhythms that sustain and invigorate the new worldview. And I read that and I thought, as I think about the people who I've seen come to Christ over the last 5-10 years, that's actually been true in most of their lives.
Yeah, absolutely. So in my previous church, we ran a program called Coach. We taught our middle class people, we had some social workers on staff, kind of how to be life support people for people who are kind of doing it tough, living on Struggle Street. And so there was lots of one-to-one sharing. People were in disruption, but there weren't many conversions. Mm-hmm. And we were kind of scratching our head and asking ourselves why. And then I read Rodney Stark, and we kind of thought, when there's just one Christian and one non-Christian, it's just an opinion. Mm. And you can easily dismiss an opinion. But when a person going through disruption, talking to an advocate, actually becomes a part of a community, and a number of those people in that community actually hold the new belief system. So for instance, actually you make good friends by being a friend, not by filling your tank and spilling the leftovers. When you experience people living that way, you actually go, this is more than just somebody's idea. This actually is a tried and tested way to live that works within this subculture. And I'm not just hearing it, I'm seeing it and I'm feeling it. And that is even more compelling.
Now, as you say that, I'm thinking about the debate within evangelism of, do we bring people into our thing, or do we send our people out to talk to their co-worker at the office and read the Bible with them at lunchtime? And I'm seeing that, I think I'm hearing you argue that if we just send our person out to read the Bible with a co-worker at the office on Tuesday lunchtime, then in fact we need to have a connect strategy as well.
I think that has shifted in post-Christendom. So in Christendom, where your average person felt a sense of guilt, a sense of the looming eternity and where they might spend it, a sense that somehow Jesus was impressive and I'm not quite like Jesus, then a one-to-one conversation might speak to their yearnings. Mm-hmm. But if we come back to your or my Hindu neighbour, if I just catch up one-to-one with this Hindu person and we chat and compare our different religions, I'm unlikely to be persuaded by that. But somehow if I come into his network or he comes into my network or whatever, then I think that gives us that shared sense, that gives the person in disruption that shared sense of, okay, I'm now part of a subculture, and I could belong to these people and I could have the joy or the centeredness or whatever it is that they kind of have. Sam Chan talks about this in terms of merging your universes. I think it's the same phenomenon he's talking about.
You've actually given me some language to understand what's happening as we've run Introducing God each term, and then our course becomes an ongoing group. And those people make friends and they're doing life together on a Monday night, and that group gradually gets incorporated into the church community.
Absolutely. And here's a parallel insight with Alpha. Alpha has the weekend away. And for non-Christians, they have associates and friends, right? You don't go away for the weekend with your associates. No. I play soccer with a bunch of non-Christian guys, and I'm sort of a member of the team, but when I go on the end of season trip away, suddenly
we become friends.
And so for a non-Christian to actually say, I'm prepared to go for a weekend away with some Christians and talk about their belief and their value system, there's something sociological that's happening there, not just hearing the talks on the weekend away. So you're dead right. Introducing God, Alpha, all those courses are social phenomena, and the way the course works is actually part of the tool of bringing people on the journey.
And I do find it phenomenal that the non-Christians are prepared to come. You know, it is amazing, because our gut reaction beforehand is it's not going to work.
Yeah.
But time and time again, we've seen people, and I think it's actually because the non-Christian has boring lives.
Yeah, I think they're perhaps lacking some dynamism. I think they're probably lacking
relationship. Yeah, and if somebody wants to actually say, let's go away, and I've been enjoying these conversations. We've been talking about things of substance, and you're saying, let's go and have a fun and substantial weekend. Well,
these people care about me. They listen to me. They respect me, but that doesn't mean that they just offhandishly agree and then disregard my views.
Yeah. Now let's talk discipleship and raising children and youth, kids and youth, in as a subculture within the post-Christian worldview culture.
So the shift from Christendom to post-Christendom not only makes evangelism a challenge, it makes discipleship a challenge. Because what's happening is that as our children are growing up, they are imbibing all the post-Christendom assumptions and they're refracting the gospel message through their cultural lenses. And so we've actually now got to, I suggest in the book, raise the next generation of Christians as if they're kind of like a subculture, right? We know what the dominant culture believes. We get its appeal, but we also don't believe it. We don't follow it. We don't find our dreams and aspirations where they find them because it has these flaws.
Now you had, for me, a crazy story of growing up in a Dutch subculture that I just found, wow, that's amazing. Tell us that.
So I lived in a place called Kingston in Tasmania.
This is teenage David.
Yes. So finishing high school, going to university. And turns out my sociology lecturer did a PhD into the Dutch in southern Tasmania, and this was the most pure Dutch community outside of Holland anywhere in the world.
Okay.
And so you could live here, and in an average week, a Dutch person would go to a school with all Dutch people, play for a soccer club with Dutchies, or play netball, go to the movies on the weekend. The big festival was Dutch, the shopping centres were Dutch.
And half your Dutch church worked for the same Dutch company.
Yeah, that's right. So you would go to the building site and it was owned by people from church, and all your Dutch friends were there. And so we had this profound sense that actually we were Dutch, and to kind of quote a platitude, if you're not Dutch, you're not much.
Right.
So
that's what you guys thought.
Yeah. So there was kind of like a...
Is that racist?
Look, I don't think cultural pride has to be racism. But yeah, we had a sense of, we get that Aussies play footy and we play soccer. We get that Aussies eat donuts and we eat oliebollen. We get that Aussies shop on Sundays and we don't. But we're proud of our culture, and actually we think our worldview works better. And we're more committed to our community, and we think our community is richer and deeper. So that's why we're not.
This line's jumped out at me. We were frugal, hardworking, practical, inclined to small business ownership, had working bees, helped build each other's houses, and we were on average wealthier than the Aussies. We knew and understood their worldview, lived in their country, but we could name why our world was different and, in our mind, better.
And imagine your teenage kid being able to do that about the Australian culture.
And say that, say, I see what's Australia, I see what the gospel is, and our world is better.
Yeah. And that's what we need to teach our teenage children to do. Both to...
And that doesn't strike me as a new idea to you. You've been reflecting on that for 30 years.
Yeah, and I went and watched Barbie with my 21-year-old daughter this week. And we drove home and we deconstructed Barbie.
Yeah.
And she's had a lifetime of being able to analyse what culture believes and why it's flawed and why the Christian message is better, where culture is sometimes half true.
Yeah.
But in the end, different from the gospel. And we had a wonderful conversation. It was very fulfilling to kind of hear her insights. And that's a conversation. When I was growing up, when my kids were growing up, we'd stop the movie at the end and we'd say, right, what was going on in that movie? What values were being pushed? What agendas were there? What assumptions were there? Do we agree? Do we disagree? How does that contrast with the gospel? Yeah, you have to parent like that in the current world.
Yeah, okay. And how do you, as the church pastor of a large church, make that happen in your youth ministry? And it's really not just what you're doing, it's how do you help the parents to do it at home?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good point. I think you've got to equip your parents to be able to do that at home. That's partially why I've written the book.
So, right, okay, yeah.
So I think what I'm trying to do with this book is if you have a conversation with your kid and you kind of go, I don't get what they're thinking, I want you to be able to flick to the end of one of the chapters where I've got a summary and go, hang on a sec, let me remind myself, they assume this.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
That's why they arrived at that conclusion.
Yeah. But what kind of seminars have you done at church over the years to help parents think like this? Yeah.
Well, the last couple of years have kind of been COVID, and in my own church we're going through some other disruptions. I'm actually speaking to Christian school teachers, I'm speaking to parents at Christian schools, I'm speaking to youth leaders. I think we need to name up the assumptions of our culture, we need to name up the idols, and then we need to kind of show actually those idols don't deliver, and often they're a fake. They're a rip-off of some genuine dimension of the gospel, which is even better. Actually, I've got a website, davidrietveld.com, and I've got there a subheading called Gospel Windows into the Post-Christian Worldview. And I've got a table there where I kind of show these are the yearnings of post-Christendom. Here's why they're an idol and they don't deliver. Here's how the gospel pokes out the half-truth, and here's how the gospel is an even richer, fuller version of the fake that the post-Christian worldview is offering.
Thank you so much for coming in. You've got me thinking about a lot of things, and David Rietveld has been my guest on The Pastor's Heart. This is his new book, Being Christian After Christendom, and we've put a link to that and the link to David's website on the show notes, and you can buy the book and those kind of things. This is Dominic Steele. We'll be back with you for The Pastor's Heart next Tuesday afternoon.